to solicit involvement and help. So that comes at the end of the presentation, and I'm looking forward for your sympathy and support. So just a few words about how I came to this subject. As you may know, I'm a cosmologist, and I've been spending my career studying the history of the universe. And as I got older, the words of my father rang in my ears: Sandra, make yourself useful. And I began to wonder, what did this cosmological knowledge, what was it any practical use? So I began to think along those lines, and ultimately I convinced myself that yes, there are some things coming from cosmology that human beings really need to know, and I emphasize that word need. So here's a message from cosmology that I think is important. Let's see. And it's that we're very lucky to have Earth as it is in a solar system that's stable. And it's quite likely that we could live here for another 100 million years or so. And therefore, we've been given the gift of cosmic time. And it occurred to me suddenly that maybe there was a moral issue that arises by virtue of knowing that fact. It was the first time I saw a connection between learning about the history of the universe and thinking about ethical or moral issues as a human being. And it's very interesting, I think, that we are the first generation of humans to appreciate our situation and to be aware that we have this moral challenge. Okay, so this led me to think further to three big questions that we need to be talking about, but aren't. What is this number? Well, it's this number. It's the number which, if you raise it to a power of 1,000,000, equals 2. So in other words, supposing we imagined having a stable society, a stable economy, and we didn't allow it to grow by more than a factor of 2 in terms of its demand on the environment from today, what would the annual growth be able to look like? Well, it's that number that's incredibly small. So clearly we're making the point that the backside of the argument is that the current target of something like 2 or 3% growth per year is absolutely impossible. So that's one thing that I think cosmology brings to our awareness, is that we, in principle, have long timescales to think about, and our current strategy for an economy just doesn't fit that. Just to illustrate, here's some statistics. This is the copper production for the last 110 years, growing at 3.3% per year. That's stuff in, but there's also stuff out, waste. Plastic waste has grown at 7% for the last 65 years. I think this is an amazing picture. So these ruminations lead to question 1. There's no global discussion at this time on the limits of economic growth and what an alternative viable economy, long-term economy, would look like. All right, moving to question 2, Earth system models. Here's what the DOE tells us is an Earth system model. Okay. And you can't read the fine print, don't bother, but there's a little red box. And the little red box is the only place that their explanation mentions human beings. Whereas we know that human beings are the dominant influence in the Earth system right now. An interesting fact, I believe it's true that 96% of all mammalian flesh by weight is either human beings or our livestock. And the other 4% is tigers and lions and things like that, you know. Recently, several thousand years ago, it was completely the opposite. So we're dominating the planet. And that leads us to question 2. There's no shared global understanding of Earth as a system for harboring intelligent life, if we're intelligent. the instabilities that are inherent in a system like that, how to tame them. And I'll put a little blue box around my second question because I really am personally very interested in this Earth's ultimate carrying capacity for human beings. Wouldn't you think that this would be on the tip of everybody's tongue? We see the population growing, and in a minute, hear that the population is going to fall. I'll get to that. The point is, there's almost no discussion. If you dig in the academic literature, there are a few papers, but even in university classes, nobody talks about this. Okay, so this brings me to my third question, the ethics of the future. If you have to make decisions, and I think we all in this room think society, civilization is on the cusp of lots of decisions. You need a value system in order to make those decisions, and that brings us back to the ethics of the situation. Well, where do human ethical principles come from? Again, there's no shared understanding of this, but here's my view. It's an emerging view. It's called evolutionary ethics. And it says that ethics is kind of a shorthand method for making very tough decisions about conflicting goods. All living species face this problem, and therefore they've evolved their own ethical systems to support their particular business plan. And ethical systems have been honed by evolution, including ours. Well, that explains a lot, because coming to the question before us today, how do we value the future? We have a very weak moral organ for valuing the future, because having one was never necessary for our evolving to this point. And that's because the future influence, the future reach of a human individual was short, a few decades at most. So the future was left to take care of itself. And now that the decisions we're making today could last for hundreds of thousands of years, where CO2 is concerned, that situation has changed. Leading us to question 3. There's no collective consensus on the origin of human ethics and its relation to planning Earth's future. Okay, I sort of set the stage, I hope, here with some questions that need attention. Let me turn now for a moment to trends that we should all be watching. So there are many trends, but in the interest of time, I've picked 5 that stand out. The first one, of course, as we know, is global warming. And I've deliberately not sanitized it to the modern jargon, climate change. No, it's global warming. And it seems as though 3 degrees C is kind of emerging in most people's mind by the end of this century as the most probable temperature rise. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it's very hard to find out what it really means. The IPCC has a habit of using the vaguest, most non-descriptive language in its reports. Things are more frequent. Droughts will be more frequent. Well, what does that mean for me, my life? It's vague. I think deliberately so. A rare exception is the work of Tim Linton and his group at Exeter University, and they've written a series of papers, this one in particular, quantifying the human cost of global warming. They haven't done it the way economists try to do it, and I think economists make a botch of that. Instead of talking about dollars, they're talking about people's lives. And so they show charts like this. Areas that are purple are uninhabitable unless you have air conditioning. It's a remarkable thing about the world today. There's almost no square mile where you couldn't live if you could sit in the shade. But we are on the edge of that. And so when the temperature goes up even a little bit, a large fraction of habitable regions are no longer habitable. So if you look at the little number at the bottom, that's for a global warming of 2.7 degrees. And here's the similar picture for 3.4 degrees. I'll go back and forth a little bit. Okay, so pick 3 degrees, it's in the middle here, and you can take your average. The bottom line is that at 3 degrees, 3 billion people move or die. This was the statistic that finally got my attention, that made global warming real to me. 3 degrees, it sounds insignificant, and we're already 1.5 there. What could another 1.5 degree do, right? This is what it does. So just in an effort to make these facts more relevant to our decisions here in this country, there are about 1 billion people in South America who will have to leave. We are reduced to a state of paralysis with 1 million people at our southern border. What is life going to be like with 1 billion, hundreds of millions? And of course, they're not going to sit still and die. They're going to move well before that. Well before it becomes uninhabitable, it will become uninhabitable for the crops that they're growing. And this is already happening in Central America and probably other places. So again, trying to make this more tangible, what kind of immigration policy should we be thinking about? And it's a hard choice. I mean, do we want to absorb a population of 1 billion people over 50 years? It's a terrifying choice, but it's right there in front of us. Okay, that's one trend, global warming and associated with mass migration. Trend number 2 is the amount and cost of energy. So modern society is completely based on cheap energy, which comes from fossil fuels. And everything we take for granted depends on that, the way things are structured. And there's a lot of fossil fuel left. So a very good question is how much more is going to be burned and how much will be left to sit in the ground? We don't know yet. All right, but these are all questions to think about. And it's impossible to figure out really how much Earth will warm until you have some theory for how much more fossil fuel energy is going to be burned and how big the future emissions are going to be. I will say that if we just continue to burn at today's rate until 2090, that's when we reach 3 degrees. So that's a benchmark you can think about. If we go higher, it's worse. If it declines, then it might be somewhat better than 3 degrees on that basis. So here's a little detour. It's in the blue box here. I think that the effect of cheap energy is so ubiquitous. It's like the goldfish doesn't see the water. I think that if we think about it, our notion of human rights that were born in the Enlightenment, what we call the liberal point of view, really depends on having cheap energy. And I worry very deeply about what is going to happen to the concept of human rights. They're kind of a luxury that we enjoy now because of this. And if cheap energy goes away, these rights may recede. What was slavery? Slavery was simply a strategy for powerful people to accumulate more energy. And then there's also the issue of women's rights and how they would evolve in an atmosphere without cheap energy. Okay, trend number 3, dwindling renewable resources. Human consumption is limited ultimately by renewable resources. What do I mean by that? I mean having soil to grow in, fresh water, and the ability to process CO2 out of the atmosphere. And there are some really worrisome statistics 60 harvests left in Iowa because the thickness of the soil is continually decreasing there because of modern farming methods. Or, for example, the CO2 uptake of forests is going down about 1% per year and will be zero in 100 years and get worse, actually, faster if things warm more. Okay, factors like these set the ultimate carrying capacity of the planet. Every indication is that the population is going to be a lot lower moving forward. And therefore, one of the management questions that we really have to think about is how to maintain a stable society when the number of people is going down. Is it going down? Well, yes, it will. Human demographics, falling birth rates around the world. You've probably heard about this. With fewer people, what are the implications? You have vacant buildings, you have lower tax revenue, too many old people and too few young workers to support them, declining GDP. And I'll return to my question about capitalism and how it has to grow. How does capitalism survive as an economic strategy in a world in which the population is declining? Historically, over the past 150 years or so, half the growth in GDP around the world has been driven by more people, and the other half has been driven by technological advances. Fine, okay, I'm coming to my last trend introduced by this picture, which was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. What is this mysterious character? He's one of the, something snowman, right? Abominable. He's an abominable snowman who is actually doing a good deed and leading our intrepid climber through artificial intelligence, courtesy of the Infosys company. So the last thing to watch that I'm talking about today is artificial intelligence. And one of the reasons for that is it's here and now. Everything else I've talked about is like 5, 10, 20, 30 years in the future, but AI is here right now. I heard a talk by this gentleman about 3 weeks ago at Stanford, and he's a distinguished computer scientist with a great, with a great reputation, and he really threw the fear of God into us about possibility number one, humans going extinct or becoming enslaved. He is so worried about this that he is not working on efforts at Berkeley anymore. He's going off and doing his own thing because his faculty are asleep, his faculty and his administration. He's that worried. Less dramatically, we can have highly trained, high cognitive workers replaced by AI. That's bad for universities because if there aren't workers like that, then you don't need to train them. So that removes a big pin underpinning our universities. And what's the other product that we do? It's scholarship, but people are experimenting now with having AI find the science problem, make a methodology, execute the methodology, and write the paper. And this all happens within an hour or two. And so if that gets out of control, there's just going to be a flood of stuff coming at us, not to mention the fact that our stuff would be diluted in a tidal wave of AI stuff. AI is everywhere. I see articles in the Wall Street Journal very frequently. Here is one, A grades are everywhere since the arrival of ChatGPT. And that's bad for universities because AI is destroying the integrity of our product, training students. Silver lining, maybe we can make common cause because actually some students are not so keen on this and they're booing speakers off the podiums in graduation ceremonies. Okay, so let me now switch to an analysis of the state of US higher education. And I'll try to move rather rapidly through these slides. They're kind of long lists. I think it's not good. I've divided this into two categories. The first is worsening finances. And there are a lot of sub-reasons, but basically, I think the finances are in bad shape because of the fact that the middle class in our country is getting hollowed out over time, which is another trend that I could have listed. And that is the increasing amount of wealth and power in a small number of individuals. And that's having its effect on the tax base and the ability of middle class to pay for university education. So there are a bunch of things here, but let me just illustrate with a table. The table shows you 2 years, 1965 and last year. And the first column is the total California state budget. Then it's what UC gets from the state, what UC spends in total, not including medical centers, and what the state budget is spending on health and human services. So the interesting thing is to look at those factors. The state budget has gone up by a factor of 80. The contributions to the state have only gone up by 26.5. That's a lot less. The UC total spending has gone up by a factor of 50 because there's much more money coming in for the federal government. But here's the killer. The health and human services budget in the California state budget has gone up by a factor of 167. And I'm showing you this to make my point that we're just, education is just getting, in the state budget is just getting edged out by these humanitarian payments to people who need that support. And why do they need it? Because of the hollowing out of the middle class and the relegation of many people to very low income status. Just to illustrate that a little bit more, UC tuition fees have gone up by a factor of 65, but median family incomes in California have only gone up by a factor of 15. So this really illustrates how much more expensive in real terms a university education is. Well, because of the cost pressures, universities want to save money. How to do that? Hire less of their most expensive employees, which is faculty. And so here are similar numbers for UCSC from 1972 to last year. And the size of the university in round numbers went up by 4, but faculty went up by less than 3. And so the student to faculty ratio got a lot less favorable, and we're now teaching a much larger fraction of our courses with lecturers. I really do have to mention the fact that the prospect of getting large amounts of grants from the federal government in the future is not good, because the exact same problem is going on in the federal tax base. And the future demographics for universities is unfavorable. We expect 11% fewer graduating high school seniors just a decade from now. So that shrinkage is really going to hit our facilities. What's going to happen here? Are we going to start vacating buildings, etc.? My second slide is about public support. And it's definitely waning, and in some circles, it's outright antagonistic, leading with the fact that it's not perceived that an university education is such a great financial bargain anymore. And one of the reasons, I'm now going to start to sound the theme that universities are not very self-aware. And we don't realize, we never really thought through the consequences of training lots of people at an elite level year after year after year after year. And the consequences of that is that probably many of those jobs can be done with a lot less training. And as a result, there's an oversupply of overtrained people and salaries go down. And so now we have an example, UCSC psychology, graduating students, their median salary as they exit is $30,000 a year, which is not very much. They do catch up a little bit, but nevertheless, this was bad enough to put us in the cellar of UC universities in the Wall Street Journal appraisal, which said that of all campuses, the least useful financially if you wanted to get a degree and thrive in the workplace was UCSC. And by the way, UC Merced was rated 13th in the country by that criterion. Okay, so as a result, there are huge loans. We made a big strategic mistake by allowing such a high degree of polarization, political and religious, to arise on our campuses because there are a lot of voters out there on the other side. We weren't thinking about that. But I'd like to end with this particular point, which this is my opinion, and I'd be interested if you agree. We in the universities, we tend to think that we're the good guys, that education is the engine of social mobility. Everybody should get a good degree and move up in life. But in fact, this process now has been going on for decades. And if you let it run, there are some aspects that are not good. When you have a meritocracy, you automatically create an elite. Wealthy families can prepare their students better to get in. And then there's this assortative mixing problem that talented people meet other talented people in the university and they have talented children. And the fact that DEI has favored some groups over others that, at least on paper, are equally disadvantaged and deserving, at least economically. And then we use disparaging language, that famous quote by Hillary Clinton, who is regarded as an educated elite, speaking of the basket of deplorables. What was she thinking? And so I sort of sum all this all up by saying that it's educated people who make the laws that keep me down. And I think that's how education is viewed by many voters. And now, on top of all of this, we have to deal with AI. All right, so that's my introduction. What can we do about it? Well, some years ago, we founded this fledgling institute called the Earth Futures Institute at Santa Cruz. And it was stimulated by EVC Trump. Remember her? She had us all thinking idealistically about a new strategic plan. And what did she do? She went off and took another job. So we never had a chance to implement the plans that we made for her. Okay, well, I got sucked into thinking about how UCSC should deal with the future. I was swayed by her arguments, and that's how I got into this, and started this little group of people with the theme of promoting the flourishing of humanity on cosmic time, sort of a different take, thinking long term. Okay, so we've not done a great deal. We've started something called Frontier Fellowships, which some of you here have helped support, which provide $8,000 for summer research, writing something on the level of a senior thesis on something interdisciplinary that relates to Earth's futures. We're on our 5th cohort this year. We host climate salons that are online. And after quite a lot of thinking and reflecting, have settled on a new activity that I want to tell you about in just a moment, something I call the University Challenge Retreat. I'll come back to that. So here's a brief overview of our partners on campus. And by the way, I think we need more. We have some external partners. One of them is the Future of Life Institute, which is worried about various aspects of the meta crisis, especially technology and nuclear war. And I am a board member of the annual reviews and they are very interested in supporting our work here. me go back. And finally, we have some supporters in the UC system. Lauren Kinsel, he is chair of the UCSC Foundation Board. Teresa Maldonado is the UC vice president up at UCOP for research and innovation. And I have a partner, an astronomer at UC Riverside, Bahram Mobasher. All right, so what should this little institute do? Here is the thought, something called the University Challenge Retreat. And the motivation in a few lines is here. We're hurtling towards a lot of disasters. Climate's just one aspect. It's a bigger picture of threats, which have been called the meta crisis. And the thing about the meta crisis is it's not just one thing. Human civilization is this complicated network. And so you have to think about the problem with systems analysis. Whereas, and now I'm coming to my criticism of universities, university research is very siloed and short-term in its thinking. Universities communicate with jargon that people can't understand. What the public would really learn from is stories. And here's my biggest point. Universities have not tried to put this whole thing together to create a meaningful picture of the future. I think the big exception that got my attention was that paper by Tim Linton and his group, in which they actually tried to show us the parts of the world that would be uninhabitable. That's the kind of picture that we need to trigger our thinking. And a problem is that if we as faculty don't have much of a picture of the future, how are we training students who will live now for several decades and see the results of all of these developments unfolding? So I think universities, we have an obligation to serve better, and with some thought, I think we could do better. It's the goal of this retreat to start that process moving. So I'm really focused here mainly on university scholarship and how changes to that would ripple over into the pedagogy. So the format that I'd like to start with is very small and intimate, just 17 people coming and sitting around a table and discussing these questions for 3 days here in Santa Cruz in this October. And there are two things I think are really important. The set of ideas for universities to implement. Well, all studies are coming up with ideas and they go onto the shelf. I think what we might add here is really thinking hard about why universities would want to implement these ideas and how they could be feasibly done. So the thought is that there's a 3-day event in October, and immediately following, there's a presentation and a panel discussion up here on campus, kind of a trial run. Here are our thoughts. What do you guys at Santa Cruz think about that? And then I have the thought that within a year, we'd have another similar retreat, but now trying to take those principles and bringing them down in an environment that we understand better, namely the state of California. And Teresa Maldonado is quite keen on that. The idea of this retreat builds on another wonderful conference that took place in, let's see, I guess it was April 2024. And it has now produced a gigantic white paper. It was led by my colleague, Alexei Lethode from astronomy, and Chris, who's the executive assistant to the dean in the School of Engineering. There were about 50 people who came, and they had a very broad focus, thinking about all aspects of the university, teaching, research, operations, and community relations. And my thought here on this follow-on is to really focus on the research questions with the goal of getting the university intellectual firepower more engaged. So here's how things stand at the moment. Who's going to come to this? Well, I have some acquaintances who are worrying about problems like this. I'd like to give a shout out to Nate Hagans, who runs a podcast called The Great Simplification. And I really recommend that to you if you listen to things like that. His speakers are gems. Every one of them is worth listening to. And I've taken his list of 150 people and drawn from them. I've conducted 40-hour-long interviews in the past 6 months. Interestingly, they're all recorded. They could be an interesting book. Somebody is interested in academic material. And the response is extremely strong. About 20 people thus far have said that they want to come in October. And we just submitted a proposal to the Future of Life Institute to cover the costs. With 17 people, how are you going to think about the future of the world? It's very challenging. But I want to reassure people here that I'm not just thinking of a bunch of scientists. I think every division at the university has a role to play in this. Especially, let me bow in the direction of humanities, because I led with the notion that values are crucial. And history, what has happened in the past, what lessons can we learn from that? This is all the province of the humanities. I also think the artists are extremely important, because art is a way of communicating. Art, music, movies, broadly speaking, is a way of talking to regular people and moving them. So it's a very broad list of expertise. It won't be perfect by any means. One of the things I'm asking you for is your suggestions of deep thinkers who you think could contribute to this event. So I hope to address 4 questions here. What does society most urgently need to know about the future? How can universities restructure their research and teaching to generate that knowledge? How can academic findings be conveyed to society in a way that will have real impact? And most important, how can universities be induced to make changes? Those are the big questions. In the 3 days, I'm contemplating a structure that looks like this, but I welcome your feedback. Day 1 is scenario building. I'm very big on scenarios. Scenarios, in my way of thinking, are not predictions. They're stories of what plausibly might happen that we construct in order to trigger our thinking, trigger our imaginations, and understand what it is that we need to be thinking about further. So I'm hoping that we'll have 5 brave people construct 5 different scenarios, stand up and give them. Each one has a time span of 50 years, not a small task. And then we discuss them in that first day. Okay, does that scenario was it a good choice? Is it something that is relevant? Do we like the way you developed it? What would society need to know in order to prepare for that set of events? And how would a university provide that and communicate that knowledge? So that's day 1. And one other tool, in addition to the scenario that I'm thinking about, is something that I like to call a focusing question. I complained a few minutes ago that university contemplation of the future is very piecemeal. It's very siloed by discipline and by project. And I think to think about the future, you need to be much more holistic and synergistic. As a tool to do that, I'm thinking that we could use these so-called focusing questions, and I give you an example here. I'm a 35-year-old woman living in the US in 1975. That's approximately 15 years from now. Where do I go to give birth safely? And how much does it cost me?
2075.
2075, yeah, beg your pardon. I'm an astronomer, I can't tell time. Okay, right, 2075, thank you. Right, and I'm deliberately choosing a concern that's a concern to women because I think they get lost in these arguments. I'm listening to these futurist thinkers hold forth on podcasts. They're all men, interestingly. And they're many of them are kind of glorifying the simple age, the hunter-gatherer age, when we were all happier. And modern life is making us unhappy, very stressful, and so on. My reaction is, do I, as a woman, want to give birth under a bush? No, I don't. If there's going to be some shrinkage in resources, I want to make sure that enough is reserved such that I'm going to get good care when it's my time to deliver. And of course, the point of something like this is, what does it take to provide that service? Who got trained? What instruments were available? Did they have an X-ray machine? Did they have anesthesia? Do they have anesthesia? Women need cesareans, and therefore we need some capability to deliver surgical care, et cetera, et cetera. So this focusing question sits at the top of a pyramid of requirements. And if you say this is a goal, then you have to put a lot of other pieces in place in order to achieve it. All right, day 2 would be taking lessons from and general themes from day 1. And day 3 is really important because that's where we would sit and try to think of why would university administrators take any of this advice? What can we make attractive and feasible? How can we make them look good? And if resources are required, where will they come from? So the goal is not just to submit the usual requests, but also some strategies for making it happen. And then finally, day 4 is the presentation here up at UCSC. And within a year, I hope we could mount another similar event, but this time focused and populated by influential people from California. All right, so here I'm thinking that this is the roadmap that might get university administrator attention, because the near-term threat is AI, and the goal would be to weave that into future unfolding events. If we can mobilize and cultivate an appetite and a need for change using this near-term event, how can it be capitalized and further developed to deal with subsequent issues? Okay, so this is my last slide. And this is one of the reasons I came here today, was to see if you'd be interested in these thoughts and inviting you to get involved. I need all kinds of things. Advice, strategy, could use an executive committee now for Earth Futures Institute. Your suggestions for retreat participants would be much appreciated. Here's a really important one. I want to put on a pilot retreat sometime. That's a one-day event, sometime in the first 2 weeks of July. It's only a one-day commitment, and I'm sure you would find it fascinating. Come, we have roughly 15 people, and we try to actually do some of the work that I've outlined for the agenda. I hope to have this campus presentation afterwards. It needs organizing. Following retreat also needs thought. How are we going to promulgate the results? We need to write op-eds. People need to appear on podcasts, give presentations. There needs to be a network on campus of people who know about this, and more people who can get involved. One of the tools that I think will emerge from this retreat is the concept of a meta department. For example, just consider one of the colleges, maybe Rachel Carson, because it's environmentally oriented. Supposing we asked our faculty, are you interested in these problems? Would you like to devote a portion of your research efforts to working with other people on these big synthetic problems? Fine, we will find a home for you in Rachel Carson, and we're going to renegotiate how you spend your time and what's expected of you in terms of your scientific publishing, your reviews, your performance reviews, and so on. But I think if we thought about it, very little cost, we could ask for volunteers on our campus to create one of these units, and we could experiment with how it would be run. Okay, and then last but not least, if you know important people and would make an introduction, that would be really great. So that's what I wanted to say to you today, and I'm very interested in your comments and your advice. And here is a sign-up sheet where you can write your name down with your email if you want to be involved more, or just ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. It's quite a lot to think about. We'll open this for questions. Yeah.
Can you say a few more words about the July pilot? What are you thinking now?
I'm really thinking that we'd have a brave person do a scenario, and then we'd pick it apart according to the questions that I've asked, and see if that outline that I put forward actually works, and end with a draft list of suggestions that we would like to submit to a friendly university administrator who's listening to us with attention. And I'm not sure that we would, it's all of them. No, I think that was the purpose of my introduction. If you're a university administrator today, you should be terrified. Our business model is maybe not long for this world. So I would think you might not adopt all these suggestions, but you ought to listen with an open mind to somebody who comes to you with a new vision. And let me say, by the way, I don't think in terms of taking the battleship and changing it 15 degrees no. I think the first step is probably launching a little Zodiac off the starboard bow so that it can go in a different direction. So if only a few % of people at universities took an interest in this, that would be, I think, a very powerful seed. Yeah.
I suggest if he rate Carson and Porter, because Porter has written down.
See, already advice.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, when you ask questions, please speak up.
Yeah.
You're not just talking to Sandy.
The suggestion, the observation, the important fact, Porter, not Rachel Carson, Porter has an endowment. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could very briefly elaborate on the positives and negatives of AI in the environmental issues.
I tend to be kind of skeptical of that connection. I need to learn more. A lot of people are writing about how it's going to make us so much more efficient and so on, but they are people, I think, who are trapped in the economic growth model point of view. And when they say it's successful, somehow they say we're going to use it to do more with less. And history shows that we've never achieved any appreciable decoupling between absolute decoupling between economic growth and environmental demand. So I'm deeply skeptical that AI per se will improve or reduce our impact on the environment. And of course, everybody's talking about data centers, and they in themselves would only increase it.
It would be interesting in a presentation to say what ChatGPT says about how we solve the environmental problems.
Yes, I'm rest assured I'm asking questions like that. I find that it's trapped in current day thinking. It's not able to envision a completely different structure.
Yes.
Hi, thanks so much, Sandy, for that presentation. I'm interested in going a little deeper into your research on the structural problems of the university, research models, let's say. And I wonder if you found any reading or other people in the United States, let's just limit it to that, that are thinking along similar lines you found useful, that have targeted or provoked any of your questions that you have at this point.
Yeah, yes, I have done some research along those lines, especially other universities that have addressed the climate issue and wondered how they could be more relevant. And I think the silo problem is well recognized, but I haven't seen anybody come up with the idea of a meta department yet as a way of solving that. So I think there are probably new ideas there. You know, was it last week that Yale came out with their safe self-study? And has anybody read that? I meant to read it for today. Was it good? Was there something new there that was, no, nobody knows? I did read a recipe for the new reinvigoration of the universities that was written by the AAUP. And I was deeply disappointed in that. Basically, what it said, knew this, knew that, but really it was just reintroducing all of the wonderful aspects of 20 years ago and making 20 years happen again. And it was very defensive. People don't realize how good we are, and we need to tell them how good we are. I think that's not the right tone of voice with our citizenry today.
I worry about the same problem with the meta department idea.
Mm.
That sounds like something that would have gone really well at Santa Cruz 40 or 50 years ago, but things became more and more siloed, and it's almost impossible at UCSC now to do anything that is outside a single department.
That is very true. The whole system is aimed in this direction, isn't it? And your colleagues in your department, your review starts with them, and they have old think, and everybody up the chain has old think, and all those scientific societies that are handing out prizes that are so interesting and attractive, they only give prizes for narrow avenues of research. To say that we're going to address the silo problem is equivalent to saying that we are going to make a massive transformation in the way universities are structured and operate. And I think we could think about it in terms of a small zodiac. Yeah.
That would have been much easier when the universities were growing, because you could easily start new initiatives when there's lots of spare resources. I think it's going to be much, much harder now.
I totally agree with you. And that's why I'm thinking actually that this letting people vote with their feet, existing staff, and maybe appointing of leavening with some temporary visiting professors, which might be funded by friendly donors for reasonable amounts of money. All I can say is I'm acutely aware of the limitations that you have brought to our attention, and I totally agree.
Yeah, I don't totally. Recently, there's been a new Department of Environmental Science.
Go to the microphone.
There's now a new Department of Environmental Science that has just developed in the last few years. Again, it brings together a number of different disciplines that weren't brought together in the past. I mean, we had an environmental studies program that was largely social sciences. This is, it's still, we're scientists in that, but this is environmental science. So it is possible to do that. Yeah.
Well, not everybody has to do it, only some.
So I'm also thinking from the point of view of
architects and architectural historians, which might sound narrow, but in fact, most of the current ones are taught to think extremely broadly, just as you said. So I can't suggest particularly names, although Richard Furnow, who's been involved with planning of this campus and was a graduate of this campus, does think quite broadly on these issues. I don't know if he'd be a good one or not, but he could maybe suggest some.
Right.
They're trained to think very broadly. And so maybe in that direction, you might find someone who would be helpful to this program.
Thank you for that suggestion. Land use development, the built environment, I think is absolutely key to, we're stuck with the built environment. What are we going to do with it? We're not going to tear it all down. We have to make feasible changes in it. I would really appreciate names along those lines. If you can just think a little bit more and give me a name, I'd be great.
As usual, thank you very, very much. Money will always be a good part of any transportation. At the last Chancellor Marie presentation, she said explicitly there's a $750 million campaign that are going. Is your part of your vision part of that? Split $750 million is big enough chunk. So she said, I would love it, Sandy. You know, $250 million of that and go for transformation. That. What do you say about getting the money?
Well, I think the timing is kind of unfortunate. If I had been on the ball and thinking about this retreat 3 years ago, then the message would be ready. I don't see much evidence of this kind of thinking in the way the campaign is currently being presented. Perhaps, it will run on for a while. Perhaps there's room for some development. I will say that the development people in PB-Sci they know about this and they think it's a good idea. So the thought is in the system and hopefully it will grow. And of course, you're thinking of ways to do that yourself too. So thank you very much for that.
Ballpark, were we talking about $200 million?
Oh, no, it depends on what you want to do. So the Zodiac, I think, run a Zodiac for a while, $2-3 million. Not that much. Yeah. But here's another concept. UC Santa Barbara has been very successful with its Institute for Theoretical Physics. And one of the new things that it does, by the way, Santa Cruz almost got that many, many years ago. We lost out because Santa Barbara volunteered to build the building and we did not. And that was the difference. But what are they doing? It's been their strategy to have programs that are kind of broad in concept that bring people together from different fields, and then they last for a while. So people come and spend a fair fraction of their sabbatical there. And they even have apartments now for families and childcare. It's quite elaborate. So I think if we did something like that, and bringing people from all walks of life, journalists, people who make movies, social media, etc., on long-term themes. Well, that's a $100 million project. Yeah. But before I did that, really, I'd like to wake up universities more generally at a lower cost level.
Is there one more question? Otherwise, we bring the formalities to a close. So thank you.
See me and write your name down, or at least consider